Is Heat the most realistic heist movie ever? Many real-life crimes and more than 20 movies and games have been inspired by Heat. For example, the movie Hell or High Water, which has so many similarities including the characters, photography and story. GTA 5, the best-selling PC and console game of all time, has every location from Heat included in the map and the gameplay. You have the shoulder bags full of cash and suits with gloves on look, and the main character dresses and looks exactly like Robert DeNiro's character in Heat. Why is it so realistic? There are many reasons. First, there's the realism in the action scenes. In Heat, we're always in the middle of the action. The action scenes are so realistic because the actors had 3 months of firearms training with live bullets. They were in a boot camp for 3 months where they had 2 curriculums. One for Neil's crew, the criminals, and one for Vincent's crew, the detectives. They have these for many movies, but not usually with real bullets. They practiced for the shootout outside the bank many times at their camp and got it perfect. It was precisely choreographed in extreme detail. The director, Michael Mann, prepped by going out regularly with an LAPD commander on calls in LA. These were in real-life dangerous situations. There was a restaurant in LA where on one night there would be a big group of gangsters and their families. In the same restaurant on another night, LAPD detectives and their families would eat and hang out. They were all there regularly. Michael Mann would have the actors playing the gangsters be in the restaurant at the same time as the real gangsters. And on the night the detectives were there, the actors playing detectives would hang out in the restaurant. There were a lot of technical advisors who were ex-police and ex-bank robbers, including Dennis Farina, an ex-Chicago detective who's now an actor. He's in Snatch, Get Shorty, and Michael Mann's Thief. Eddie Bunker, an ex-bank robber, author and actor, was also a technical advisor. Secondly, the score and sound effects. Lots of care was taken to make sure the bullet sounds are as realistic as possible, especially the shootout outside the bank. Lots of experimental sound effects were used. Moby's music is used in the famous scenes where Vincent and Neil meet in the diner and also at the end. The score is very atmospheric for family and personal life scenes. Third, detail in the photography. The way LA is filmed is very realistic and also shows parts of LA which are usually never in Hollywood movies. For example, there's the dogfighting area, the location of the bank robbery, the abandoned drive-in theater. There are also very wide shots showing the action. The way the film traffic is in the background when the guard is executed during the first armored truck robbery. There's so much attention to detail. There is a dead bird in the pool when Vincent goes to a murder scene, and the dead bird is there on purpose. Appearing in shot for only a second is the lining they have in the boot of the car for Wayne Grove's body when they try to kill him outside of the diner. And that shot is there for maximum 1 or 2 seconds, but if you pause it, you'll see it's very detailed. There's also the glass with the folded napkin Neil brings to Edie while she sleeps the first night they met. The napkin is folded on purpose because it's something that Mann saw in prison, which brings us to Michael Mann. Most of the realism from the way Michael Mann directed and wrote Heat. This was not his first script or movie where he focused on the life of criminals. He co-wrote Straight Time, which is based on Eddie Bunker's book. Eddie Bunker was a bank robber and spent a lot of time in West Coast prisons. He wrote many books about prison, and the script for Straight Time is based on one of his books, No Beast So Fierce. DeNiro and the other crew members had to read it to prepare for Heat. Mann did go to prison. He was there to make a movie. He co-wrote and directed a movie set in a prison. Not only was it set in a prison, but was filmed in a prison with many convicts who were actors, Jericho Mile, and it was filmed inside Folsom Prison. Eddie Bunker was able to communicate with the prisoners so they didn't riot or disrupt the filming. This was a TV movie which wasn't released in cinemas. His first cinematic release film was Thieves, starring James Caan. This movie has many similarities with Heat, as we're taken into the life of a thief. We see his personal life, we see his mentality after spending a lot of time in prison. He's also a very self-aware person, and his character is actually very similar to the character that DeNiro plays, Neil McCauley, in Heat. They are both cool professionals, but they take risks when they get emotionally involved with women. In Thief, we see the thief's perspective. In Heat, we see both the thief's perspective and the policeman's perspective. Mann wrote and directed LA Takedown, which has the same story as Heat. It was a TV movie. He already had most of the Heat script, but to make this movie shorter, he had to cut a little bit of the script. So if you watch LA Takedown, you'll see that it's very similar to Heat, but the budget is a lot smaller. Heat is around an hour longer than LA Takedown. So LA Takedown was basically kind of like a practice run of Heat. And you have to say that Michael Mann really made the most of this. It's also very realistic because many of the characters are based on real people. For example, Mann was friends with Chicago detective Chuck Adamson, who Vincent Hanna is based on. Neil McCauley was a real bank robber in the 1960s in Chicago. His gang was tracked and eventually taken down by Chuck Adamson. Chuck tracked Neil for a long time. They once staked out a department store Neil's gang was going to rob in the middle of the night. One of the cops on stakeout with Chuck made a noise which spooked Neil, and they didn't go through with it. This also happened at Heat. Chuck also met Neil in a diner over coffee and asked him could he please stop committing his crimes in Chicago and go somewhere else. Neil replied that he liked Chicago. They actually had a pleasant chat, but at the end, Chuck told him that he would have to kill him if he had to, and he wouldn't hesitate. This was the basis for the famous Pacino-DeNiro diner scene in Heat. Chuck caught up with Neil and his gang eventually, and there was a shootout in a supermarket similar to the one outside the bank in Heat. Chuck ended up shooting and killing Neil. Let's talk about the characters individually. Neil McCauley is played by Robert De Niro. He's a professional, very rich, I mean look at his house, criminal, leader, mastermind, who lives by a very strict set of rules. He doesn't have a family or anyone he's attached to, so that he can stay ahead of the police. In the beginning of the movie, he's also unknown to the police. You know, his house doesn't even have any furniture, so that's how dedicated he is to not having any attachments. He and his crew are sociopaths. They are professionals, but wouldn't think twice if innocent people are hurt during their crimes. Vincent Hanna, on the other hand, is a hunter. He's hunting the criminals, but he would never put a civilian in harm's way. They are the most successful bank robbers in LA. At one time, there may have been only one or two gangs operating at that level in the entire US. Because if you have enough money to set up those scores, you don't even really need to steal. Even though they do pretend that they do. Rigid with the lifestyle, like we said, but he does deviate. He becomes suddenly spontaneous because he meets Edie, he falls in love with her. At the same time, he doesn't really want to stop what he's doing. He can't admit that to anyone else but to Hannah, Vincent Hanna, at the diner scene. And there are clues to this already. You know, Macaulay's beachfront house is probably worth more than enough to go and live in New Zealand and have a decent life. and he could probably retire, get a decent job. However, he decides to go on one last big, very risky, and he knows that, bank job, instead of just selling his house and moving to New Zealand with Edie, which he could have done. Vincent Hanna is played by Al Pacino. Vincent is a lot more hyper than the cool Neil. Hanna is happiest when he's hunting criminals. He can analyze the crime scene better than anyone. He can predict the moves of the heist team like a chess master, and he knows these guys are worthy opponents. He also knows how to deal with criminal informants so they never know where they're at with him. He knows they're using him as well, and he gets his first clue to the identities of Neil's crew by being relentless and knowing how to handle his informants. He's honest with himself and others. He says, "All I am is what I'm going after." He will not change. He isn't a cold person though. He feels the pain and the angst, as he calls it, and he uses it to be a sharper and more focused hunter. The focal point of Heat is the similarity between Vincent and Neil, which is actually very realistic, but not a theme covered in many movies where there's usually a big difference between the good guy and the bad guy. They're both around 50. They're both at the pinnacle of their careers. They know all the moves. They are experts in their field. In other career paths, these guys would definitely be friends in LinkedIn. They'd attend the same conventions. They will probably be friends. They're both leaders and have extensive teams who respect them and are extremely loyal. They're like soldiers on different sides of the war who come together for a short truce during the coffee shop scene. And in that scene, they know that they are both so similar to each other. They and their teams both have families which are affected by their work. And every action scene then affects the family scene which follows. And these scenes are very emotional usually, a lot of atmospheric panoramic shots, a lot of emotional music. And this contrasts a lot with the action scenes where we're placed in the middle of very real scenes from the beginning. The whole movie is like a chess game between two masters. They can only beat each other if the other makes a mistake. Hanna knows Macaulay is gone, but knows his only move is to put Waingro as bait, even though he knows he's lost. Neil, Macaulay, then goes for Waingro at the last second, going against his whole way of life. He's being impulsive, again, probably because of Edie. As Edie waits in the car, having panic attacks, we want him to kill Waingro and go off into the sunset. At the same time, we want Vincent to catch him. At the end, when Neil dies, we know these two guys are the same person. There is one crucial difference between Vincent and Neil, which is why they are on different sides. In the bank shootout scene, Vincent shoots Michael Chirito, played by Tom Sizemore. Chirito has picked up a child to use as a human shield. Even though he has a daughter, Vincent still shoots him, which he probably shouldn't do because it was risky. The first thing he does is go and check that the child is okay, because he genuinely cares about her. Neil, on the other hand, starts a shootout in a supermarket parking lot with hundreds of civilians, which he doesn't care get shot, which basically makes him a sociopath. And that's the reason that Vincent is the hunter and Neil is the prey. Edie, played by Amy Brennan, is the woman DeNiro falls for. She didn't like the script because she didn't like the characters and what they were doing. Therefore, Mann thought she was perfect for the part because Edie is a completely straight person who's horrified that her boyfriend is actually a big-time criminal. She's the reason DeNiro wants to have one big ass score and then go off with her to New Zealand. In reality, DeNiro is never going to change. As the audience, we really feel for her, and at the end we really want Neil to get away with killing Waingro and go off, and it's mostly for her. Justine Hannah, played by Diane Verona, is Vincent's third wife. Vincent genuinely cares about her and her daughter. He's honest with her about what he does, what he feels, and in the end he tells her he has to be what he's hunting to be able to catch his prey, and he won't change. Chris Shiherlis is played by Val Kilmer. He's Neil's trusted friend. We can tell they were in prison together. Chris is also a pro and trusted by Neil, but has a very different personal life, at least in the beginning of the movie. He's married, has a toddler, but he's also a degenerate gambler. We expect him to die during the movie, or at least I did, but he gets away with it thanks to his wife, who is Charlene Shiherlis, played by Ashley Judd. She's very street smart and knows Chris has to stop gambling, and she tries to influence him. She's forced to cooperate with the police at the end, and to bring Chris in, she cleverly warns Chris away, who gets away at the expense of probably not seeing his wife and son for a very long time. Nate, played by Jon Voight. Nate sets up Neil's scores, fences, and his outs. He also has a very good advice line for Neil. He gives him advice on the risk of the different scores. Neil seems to be taking this advice until the end, where he does go for it against Nate's advice. We don't see what happens to Nate at the end, but it makes sense that he gets away. Don Breeden, the driver in the bank heist, is played by Dennis Haysbert. He has a storyline which shows that a lot of people getting out of prison do get taken advantage of by corrupt bosses, even when they're trying to go straight. He's played by Kevin Gage. He replaces a crew member in the first armored truck heist where he kills a guard for no reason, which means they have to kill all the guards. Neil tries to kill him for this after the heist, basically punishing him for not being a pro and preventing any other risks that Waingro is going to bring to the crew. But Waingro gets away. He ends up ratting out the crew and gets used as bait for Neil, who takes him out in the hotel near the airport, but this of course leads to Vincent catching Neil. As well as being similar to each other, the actors playing Neil and Vincent are also very similar in real life. They're both born in New York. They're born 3 years apart. DeNiro was born in 1943, Pacino in 1940. They both had breakthroughs in the early 70s, DeNiro in Mean Streets, Pacino in Godfather. They were both in the same movie, in Godfather 2, but they weren't on screen at the same time. And when Heat came out, they were really at the peak or just getting to the peak of their careers. Pacino did Scent for Woman in 92, Carlito's Way in 93. DeNiro was doing Goodfellas in 90, Casino in 95. Another movie which came out around the same time as Heat is Reservoir Dogs, which seems very different at first but actually has a lot of similarities with Heat and complements it quite well. Reservoir Dogs has a dialogue that's, I would say, a little bit missing in Heat. It is dialogue related to jokes and things that they talk about when they're not discussing a heist. In Heat, no one in Neil's crew is going to make a joke when they're actually working, except when they're with their families. And this brings us to the family life with which Heat is showing us. We see the family, how do their actions affect their family. In Reservoir Dogs, we don't see this. Reservoir Dogs shows the panic after a heist goes wrong. Everyone is accusing everyone else. No one knows what's going on. This makes it very entertaining because we have all of these characters who are clashing with each other, trying to find out what went wrong. Heat has very detailed action sequences, which of course Reservoir Dogs doesn't have. Reservoir Dogs has very few even outside scenes, which makes it actually seem more like a play. But this also makes it I would say, very realistic. Obviously, part of this is due to the budget differences. Larry and Neil. So Larry is played by Harvey Keitel in Reservoir Dogs. Is very similar to Neil in Heat, I find, because they both need an emotional relationship during the movie, and in pursuing this relationship which they need, they stop being professionals, and this ends badly for both of them. Both Reservoir Dogs and Heat also show the relationship between the criminals and the cops who are going after them. And in both cases, the results, the endings are tragic. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe.